is good to be here with all of you this morning. My name is Kara. It's been with and within me this week. A word with you today, which is always a gift. It's a word that has been with and within me this week as I've sat with Psalm 23 and Psalm 23:4 in particular. I told my husband this morning, getting to preach from one verse is actually really fun. Usually we have these, big sections, and how do we get through it all? But today we get to focus in really deep on one specific verse in the middle of Psalm 23, and that is a gift to kind of get to dig down into it today. And when I am preaching on a Sunday morning, the whole week, everything becomes a sermon illustration, everything. So for example, my son is 15, and when he leaves a room or when he leaves the house, he's very confident, and he leaves with gusto, and he shuts the door really hard. And it's startling sometimes. What is happening? And I thought to myself, oh, okay, well, sometimes it feels like God's given you a door to walk through, and then you go up to it, and you're excited, and then it just shuts in your face. Sermon illustration, right? Yeah. Another one, I was talking with Leonard this week with Tuesday night, and we were on Zoom. I was in my living room, which our house is small, and when people come over, they always say, it's so cozy, which is a really kind way to say this is small, but you've done well with it. It is cozy, but every place is a public place. So I'm trying to have this conversation about these deep things, walking through the valley of the shadow of death. That's not a light phrase. And in the background, there's some commotion happening. And I hear Caleb go to the oven because the oven timer is going off. And he said, I don't think this is done. I heard him say that. And then he yells upstairs to my daughter, what temperature is the oven supposed to be at? And she yells back down, 180. And I think to myself, as I'm listening to Leonard talk about suffering, I'm thinking to myself, that's not right. And it turns out she was making brownies from a British cookbook, and it was 180 degrees Celsius. So we turned up the oven, and the brownies were delicious. She did a fantastic job. And I thought to myself, sermon illustration in the middle of this conversation. Uncomfortable things, heat, darkness, valleys. If the oven's not hot enough, the brownies don't bake. It's not a good illustration, but it's a good story. When I was 10 or 11, on the edge of adolescence, my dad lived in an apartment that was close to a neighborhood where a lot of my friends lived. And I would go to my dad's house on the weekends, and as soon as I got there, I'd drop my stuff off, and I'd run to my friend's house, and I'd hang out. And sometimes I would stay the night, but sometimes I would walk home. I don't know whose parents let me walk home in the dark at 10 or 11, but I'm old enough now to say it was a different time. But I would have to walk home, and there was this beautiful bike trail between their neighborhood and my dad's apartment. And during the day, I loved this bike trail. It was wooded, and we would go on long bike rides. I have good memories of that. It was this peaceful, grounding place for me. But it was very different in the dark. I still remember leaving my friend's neighborhood and standing on the edge of the woods, standing on the edge of the darkness. And what during the day was this beautiful, shaded, peaceful space was now this thick blanket of darkness that was terrifying. I could still feel it in my bones 20-some years later, how scary it was to go from the well-lit, street-lamped suburban neighborhood into this wooded darkness. And I think about this walk when I think about Psalm 23:4. Even if I should walk through the valley of the shadow of death. This is part of the human experience. Maybe you have your own memories of walking in dark woods and waves of uncertainty coming over you as you do that. I have another story about falling in a creek with a backpack on in the dark, and there's wolves, and I have to keep walking. I have these stories of being in the woods in the dark. Maybe it's a season of life that you're thinking of, a metaphorical darkness where the light faded and circumstances felt like one endless, unending shadow after another. And so often we name that shadow as something bad. But I wonder if there's actually something that we can learn from the shadow. And with that question this morning, the title of my sermon is A Word from the Shadow. A shadow is shade caused by the interception of light. And I've asked myself this question this week: is the shadow something to avoid, or is it part of our spiritual growth and formation? And do we miss some growth and formation and depth and intimacy with God if we spend our lives avoiding the shadow? There's a fascinating book, I brought it today if you want to look at it after the sermon, called Learning to Walk in the Dark by Barbara Brown Taylor. And in it, she explores an array of human experiences with darkness. She goes spelunking in a cave where it's completely and totally dark, no light whatsoever, and she talks about what she learns from that experience. She learns how to eat and cross the street as though she weren't able to see. She goes through the Bible and she finds every single place where God shows up in the darkness. There's some science behind this, the fact that darkness, that the dark is just as necessary for our well-being physically as the light. Our waking and sleeping circadian rhythms match the natural cycle of day and night. Artificial light has interrupted that to some degree, and we actually struggle because of that. Everything from our body chemistry to our relationships are affected. Our family lives out away from the city, and Caleb and I go on lots of walks, particularly at night, and it's so dark around us. Not as dark as the woods when I was 10, but it's dark. The street lamps go on and off. I don't know what triggers them. We haven't figured that out yet, but it's so dark that when we look up, the sky is brilliant. Like we trade off almost nightly who gets to see a shooting star, and we're walking in the dark, and one of us goes, "Oh, I saw one. I saw a shooting star." And sometimes we see it together, and that's even more exciting. But we can only see those because it's so dark. We wouldn't be able to see the wonder of the sky in its brilliance at night if it weren't so dark. St. John of the Cross, he is a figure that I learned about in divinity school, and she talks about him in this book. He was a friend and apprentice of Teresa of Avila in the 1500s, and he was thrown into prison for working with her, and eventually into solitary confinement for 2 months. And from solitary confinement, he memorized the words of what would become his book, The Dark Night of the Soul. For him, the dark night is a love story. The dark teaches that God cannot be grasped, but only encountered. And that sometimes our ideas and images of God that we make up in the light get in the way of experiencing the real thing. That's an experience learned from the shadow, from the dark. So this morning we're going to learn from the shadow. And I want to share with you a translation of, so we have what was up here as the translation from Hebrew into English. I want to share with you a translation of what is called the Septuagint, and it's the Greek translation of the Old Testament, and it was the common everyday scriptures of common everyday people in the time of Jesus. They spoke Koine Greek. It's kind of like English today, and that was what they knew. So these scriptures were a translation that were common to them. It was how they would have understood the Old Testament scriptures. So this is a translation from the Greek to the English. For even if I should go in the midst, a shadow of death, I will not fear evil things because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort and exhort me. So you can compare it. This is a fun time for me. I'm inviting you to my party. You can compare the translation from the Greek to the translation from the Hebrew. And I just think it's interesting to compare those two things. We're going to break this down section by section from this translation, and we're going to start with, for even if I should go. And the word there for go is commonly used to describe journeys. It's the word used often to describe the disciples following Jesus from one place to another in the New Testament. It's a journey word. It's also a word of following after someone. And it has this sense of transfer or transformation. Even if I should go on a journey to be transformed. Even if I should go on a journey to be transformed. It's a movement word. It infers step by step by step by step. And I need to hear this because sometimes when I'm stuck in a shadow, I don't want to go anywhere. I want to sit down and give up. But this challenges us not to do that, to keep walking, to keep journeying, to be transformed through the shadow. It's also a conditional statement. If this, then that. If I should go, then God, this is what will happen. And that requires so much trust because it says that no matter the circumstances, I will always do this. I will keep going. The next phrase is in the midst. This is why I used the Greek translation because I love this phrase so much. I wanted to be able to say in the midst. It's the parallel to the darkest valley piece there, and they're both important. But in the midst is one of my favorite phrases because there's something gritty about being in the midst or in the middle. It screams of a life fully lived, of a journey in process and someone on that journey that has refused to give up, that keeps going, keeps walking, keeps journeying in the midst of what? A shadow of death. This is such a dramatic statement. It sounds like something I would have said in high school after I had a bad day or to describe a class I didn't like. Math today felt like the valley of death. But if we take these words at face value, there's something radical going on in the psalmists in David's inner life. Up until this point in the psalm, David has had what he needed. I imagine him full, drinking of the river of life, walking along the path that God has laid out before him. It's lush and it's green and it's abundant. And then the dark valley comes. And now he's journeying in the dark, and the bright, familiar path now holds uncertainty. And that kind of darkness can be suffocating. Our minds wander, we get up confused from down, left and right feel wrong. And we don't know where we're going. We don't know what's around the next corner. We may not even know what is afoot in front of our face. It's not dramatic. It's the reality of being human in a broken world. And this is a reality that Jesus faced too. I can't help but think of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane when I think about David in the midst of the shadow of death. Jesus cries out to God, a cry that according to the text goes unanswered in that moment. You can pull it up here. We see this from Luke chapter 22. Then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down and prayed, Father, if, another conditional statement, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. Then an angel from heaven appeared to him and gave him strength. In his anguish, he prayed more earnestly. And his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down on the ground. We see here that Jesus is begging God to change the outcome. But he's also saying that if you don't change the outcome, I will still trust you. In Luke's Gethsemane scene, after Judas and the chief priests and the temple police and elders come to arrest him, the last words that Jesus says are, this is your hour and the authority of darkness, or the power of darkness. And that word there for darkness is the same word as the word for shadow in Psalm 23:4. And I can't help but wonder if Jesus doesn't have Psalm 23:4 in the back of his mind as he's being taken into custody. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear evil. I just imagine him saying that over and over to himself so that he can keep going. When Jesus names what's happening in Luke 22 as he's being arrested, he's walking into the shadow of death. And he knows that evil things are bubbling up. There's something about the qualifier evil things, and that's this next section. Even though I walk in the midst of the shadow of death, I will not fear evil things. It's not that we walk through shadows and will always be protected. Deeply, I wish that were true. I wish that were true. I wish that were true as a parent. I can't tell you how deeply I wish that were true as a parent. If our aim is not to suffer, we will fail every time. Life is not about avoiding suffering, but learning how to go through it. Leonard and I were talking that one of our goals as parents, one of the things that we are entrusted with by God, is not to keep our children from suffering because we can't do it, but to teach them how to learn to walk through it with Jesus. We can't afford to avoid it. But this also isn't fatalism. It's not sitting down and giving up and saying, well, the world is just bad and dark and there's nothing we can do about it. It's not that either. Just because someone is suffering doesn't mean that they've done something wrong. In Learning to Walk in the Dark, Barbara Brown Taylor talks about full solar spirituality. I think we've all been in these spaces where in order to trust God, everything has to be good. And even if it doesn't feel good, we have to paint it like it is. We have to make it good somehow. Full solar spirituality. We miss people when we do that because we paint over their pain. We'll miss people if we do that. Even God goes through suffering. But in the midst of all of this, we don't have to fear the evil things that will come because of what the psalmist says next. Because you are with me. The entire psalm is grounded in this phrase. The green pastures, the refreshing water, and the shadow of death. In all of it, beautiful abundance and bone-deep weariness. God, you are with me. Now, does the psalmist always fully believe this? Or does sometimes he just has to choose it? And I like to think that he doesn't always fully believe it, that he has to make himself choose it sometimes, and I like to believe that because that is true of me. Sometimes I have to choose it when I don't feel it. David goes on to say, your rod and your staff comfort and exhort me. And I use both of those words, comfort and exhort, because the Greek word there is parakaleo. It's also the same word that the word paraclete comes from, and paraclete describes the Holy Spirit. This word of comfort as in being wrapped up in peace and in care and in safety, but it's also a word of encouragement, to give courage, and it's also a word of challenge. All of those things wrapped up into one word, comfort, encouragement, and challenge. And that is what the rod and the staff do. That's what the shepherd uses those things for. In the valley of the shadow, God uses those things both to keep us from threats, but also to keep us going, to guide us when we can't see the way in front of us. The sheep may not know what's next. The sheep may not know what's ahead, but the shepherd does. I don't understand the shadow. I've lived with enough of my own that I often resent the shadow. And I, just as much as the next person, want to turn on the lights and make it go away, even if the lights are artificial. But I've also learned that to live a full life, to live all of life, I must come to accept it and even embrace it, and embrace the way in which it tends to magnify the mercy of God. Barbara Brown Taylor says, how much more was in store for me if I learned to walk in the dark? What we learn from the shadow is that life comes from death. I don't understand it. But valleys are fertile places, and in order for that soil to be fertile, something had to die. In us, something might be dying. It might be real loss or real death. It might be dreams or hopes, or it might be something that needed to die, sin or selfishness. Regardless, it's painful, and sometimes it's long. But I also know that if you are in the valley of the shadow of death with Jesus, you are cultivating life. Barbara Brown Taylor says, resurrection is always announced with Easter lilies, the sound of trumpets, bright streaming light. But it didn't happen that way. If it happened in a cave, it happened in complete silence, in absolute darkness, with the smell of damp stone and dug earth in the air. New life starts in the dark. Whether it is a seed in the ground, a baby in the womb, or Jesus in the tomb, it starts in the dark. My husband asked me this question in the last week, and this tells you the kind of conversations that we have. He said, is it possible to flirt with despair and not give in to hopelessness? And the answer is yes. We see, if you read the rest of the Psalms, if you read the lament Psalms of David, you see him do this. He gets to this place of almost despair. In the lament Psalms, there's an order. There's a complaint. Here's what's going wrong, God, and you're not here. There's a petition. I need you to do something about this. And then almost always they end with praise. Almost always. Almost despair, but not hopelessness. We see that with Jesus in Gethsemane as well. Almost despair, but not hopelessness. The question is how? How do we do that? Because that is so much harder to do than it is to say. I have two thoughts. The first is communal. Jesus walks straight into the middle of the shadow of death. And he does that for us. And if we are to model our love and compassion after Jesus, we have to stop being afraid of other people's pain and our own. We have a lot to learn from those who have long suffered. I think about those with chronic illness or mental health illness, repeated loss and ongoing grief, struggles with poverty and lack of food, people who live under oppression and in the midst of wars. Too often we speak to the shadow, trying to throw enough light at it with our words that we don't have to enter into it with others. But what if we chose instead to sit with, to listen and let God speak a word to us from the shadow, to give dignity to people who have long suffered by learning the ways in which God has shown up. We still advocate, we still offer, we still give, but we sit with and we listen for a word about his grace and mercy even in the midst, about beauty that shows up in the most unlikely of places, or we simply just learn to be the mercy itself, as one who has chosen not to run from the shadow, but who instead has chosen to sit in it with someone seeking a deep breath of compassion so that they can keep going too. The other is personal, and this is just a really practical thing. Next time, anyone else wake up in the middle of the night, like 3 a.m., like I do? Yeah, okay, so this is for you and me. So the next time, I do this quickly. If I can't fall back asleep within 5 minutes, I grab my phone or I turn a light on. Don't. I'm practicing this myself. I'm practicing not to grab my phone or turn a light on. Barbara Brown Taylor says, a bed, in short, is where you face your nearness or farness from God. Whether you are in pain or not, a bed is where you come face to face with what really matters because it's too dark for your usual shallowing distractions to work. That's hard, but it's something I'm working on because I want to pay attention to God's voice in the dark when I'd rather make it go away. So leave the dark dark and see what God has to say to you from the shadow. The shadow will come, and it might even stay. But we don't have to fear any evil there, and I know that is a radical statement. But we don't have to fear any evil there, because if we are in the valley of death with Jesus, we are cultivating life. Let's slow down long enough to trust that even in the shadow, God has something to teach us about his beauty and his mercy. Let me pray for us. God, it is a lot. It's a lot to think about. The reality of what it means to be human in a broken world. The reality of continuing to choose to walk with you and to walk after you even when it doesn't make sense. And I just ask that your Spirit would be that comfort and that courage and that challenge that we need to keep going. And I ask that we would be that for one another. Help us not to be afraid of our own pain or of the pain of our brothers and sisters, or to try and make it go away with shiny words, but to sit with and to listen and to be, and to see the ways in which you show up as merciful, even in the dark, even in the shadows. I thank you that that light is so brilliant, that you stream across the darkness as a shooting star, and we can see it clearer sometimes in the dark. Give us courage. Give us grace and mercy. Help us to do it together. Pray all these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.